What if the greatest love of your life was the one you almost let slip away forever? What if silence, fear, and a single wrong choice nearly cost Mary Bennet the only man who ever truly saw her? Because this is not a story of sudden love. This is a story of realizing too late and risking everything to fix it. There are some hearts that do not rush into love. Some hearts observe quietly, carefully, as if they are waiting for proof before they dare to feel anything at all. Mary Bennet was one of those hearts. She was not like her sisters, nor like the women who filled ballrooms with laughter and effortless charm. She stood apart not by choice, but by nature, thoughtful, reserved, often overlooked, and over time she had come to accept something dangerous, that perhaps she was not meant to be chosen. So when attention came her way, polite, expected, convenient attention, she tried to believe it was enough. She tried to shape her feelings into something sensible, something safe. Because safe did not hurt. Safe did not leave you awake at night, wondering if you had imagined everything. But love, real love does not stay quiet just because it is inconvenient. It reveals itself in the smallest moments, in the way a voice softens when speaking to you, in the way silence feels comfortable, not empty, in the way someone looks at you, not as you are expected to be, but as you truly are. And that was where everything began to change. Tom Hayward was not the kind of man who demanded attention. He did not enter a room expecting to be admired, but he had something far more dangerous, something steady, something genuine, a kindness that did not perform but simply existed. And Mary noticed. At first, she told herself it was nothing, a passing comfort, a simple ease in conversation, but then it became harder to ignore, because he listened, not politely, not out of obligation, but with real interest, as if every word she spoke mattered. And for someone who had spent so long feeling unheard, that kind of attention was not small, it was everything. Still, she resisted it, because to hope is to risk disappointment. To feel deeply is to risk losing it all. So instead, she turned her thoughts elsewhere, toward what was expected, toward what made sense, toward what would never embarrass her, never expose her heart so completely. And yet, no matter how hard she tried, something kept pulling her back. A look, a moment, a feeling she could not name without frightening herself, and slowly, almost without realizing it, she began to compare what she should feel versus what she actually did. And that is where the danger truly began. Because once you recognize the truth of your own heart, you cannot unknow it. And Mary Bennet was standing at the edge of that realization, still pretending she had a choice, still believing she could walk away from something that had already begun to claim her. But the question was no longer whether she felt it. The question was how long she could continue to deny it before it was too late, and what would happen when someone else finally forced her to face the truth. Because what if the moment she realized her heart was the exact moment she risked losing his forever? Denial is a quiet thing. It does not arrive loudly or demand to be noticed. Instead, it whispers softly, persistently, until it begins to sound like truth. And Mary Bennet listened to that whisper. She told herself she was being practical. That admiration was not love. That comfort was not meaning, because if she allowed herself to believe otherwise, everything would change. So she turned her attention where it was expected, toward a future that appeared stable, predictable, and above all, safe. Mr. Ryder was everything one could reasonably approve of. His presence was noticed, his intentions were clear, and his interest in Mary was not hidden behind hesitation or doubt. It was straightforward, certain, easy to understand, and for a time, that certainty felt like relief, because uncertainty had begun to feel dangerous. Uncertainty looked like stolen glances and unfinished sentences. It sounded like conversations that lingered just a moment too long. It felt like something growing quietly, without permission, and that was something Mary did not trust herself to face. So she chose what made sense, or at least she tried to, because even as she stood beside Mr. Ryder, even as she spoke the right words and played the part expected of her, something felt wrong, not dramatically wrong, not enough to cause alarm, just incomplete, as if she were watching her own life unfold from a distance, unable to fully step into it. And the more she tried to ignore it, the more obvious it became. Because love, real love, does not allow itself to be replaced so easily. It lingers, it waits, it reminds you in moments you least expect, a voice you wish to hear instead, a presence you instinctively search for in a crowded room, a quiet disappointment you cannot explain when it is someone else standing beside you. And Mary began to notice those moments more and more. She noticed who she looked for first, who made her feel at ease without trying, who made silence feel full instead of empty, and slowly the truth she had been avoiding began to take shape. But truth alone is not enough, because truth demands action, and action requires courage, something Mary was not yet certain she possessed. Meanwhile, Tom Hayward was fighting a battle of his own. He had never intended to fall in love with her. Perhaps he had told himself the same lies, that it was only friendship, only fondness, and only habit. But feelings once rooted do not simply disappear, they grow, and his had grown in silence, in patience, in quiet understanding. In every moment he chose not to speak, for fear of saying too much, because what right did he have? What could he offer her truly? Not wealth, not security, not the kind of life others might promise. And so he did what many do when they fear they are not enough. He stepped back, not completely, not obviously, but just enough to protect himself from hope, just enough to convince himself that her happiness might lie elsewhere, even if that thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. And so they stood on opposite sides of the same truth, both feeling it, both recognizing it, both refusing to speak it aloud, until the silence between them began to feel heavier than any confession ever could, because there comes a moment when unspoken words become impossible to carry, a moment when something has to break. And for Mary, that moment arrived not with clarity, but with fear. A sudden, overwhelming realization that she was about to make a choice she could never undo, and worse, that she might already be too late to change it. Because what happens when you finally understand your heart, only to realize it may longer be yours to give? Regret does not arrive all at once. It builds slowly, quietly, until it becomes impossible to ignore. For Mary Bennet, it began as a feeling she could not name, a hesitation in her voice, a pause before every answer, a strange, persistent weight in her chest whenever Tom Hayward was near, and even heavier when he was not. She had made what she believed was the right choice, the sensible choice, and yet nothing about it felt right, because the truth she had tried so hard to silence was no longer willing to remain hidden. It followed her into every conversation, every quiet moment, every forced smile that did not quite reach her eyes, and the more she tried to ignore it, the louder it became. Until one question refused to leave her: why does everything feel wrong when everything is supposed to be right? That was when fear began to take hold. Not fear of judgment, not fear of failure, but fear of herself. Fear that she had misunderstood her own heart. Fear that she had chosen a life that would never truly feel like her own. And worst of all, fear that the one person who did understand her was slipping further away with every passing moment. Because Tom had changed. Not in a way that others would notice, not in a way that could easily be explained. But Mary saw it. She saw the distance in his eyes, the careful restraint in his words, the way he no longer lingered the way he once had. It was subtle, but it was there. And it terrified her, because for the first time, she realized something she had never allowed herself to consider before. He might stop waiting. He might decide that she had chosen someone else, that whatever existed between them had never truly existed at all. And if that happened, there would be no undoing it, no second chance, no quiet understanding left between them. That realization struck deeper than anything else, because suddenly this was no longer about confusion or uncertainty. It was about loss, the kind of loss that does not come from something ending, but from something never being given the chance to begin. And Mary could not bear it, not anymore, not after everything she had come to understand, not after finally seeing the truth she had spent so long avoiding. Because now she knew. She knew what his presence meant to her. She knew why every conversation with him felt effortless while others felt forced. She knew why the thought of a future without him felt empty. And once that truth was clear, there was no going back to who she had been before, no returning to safety, no pretending she did not feel what she felt, but knowing the truth did not make speaking it any easier. Because what if she had waited too long? What if her silence had already answered for her? What if he had already begun to let her go? These questions followed her relentlessly, and with each passing moment, the urgency grew. Because love, when left unspoken, does not remain unchanged. It either deepens or disappears, and Mary could feel it slipping through her grasp, not because it was never there, but because she had been too afraid to claim it. So now, she stood at a crossroads she could no longer avoid. One path led to safety, to a life that would never challenge her, never expose her heart, but would also never truly fulfill it. The other demanded everything: honesty, vulnerability, courage she was not sure she possessed, but it also held the one thing she now knew she could not live without. And for the first time in her life, Mary Bennet understood that some risks are not choices, they are necessities, because the cost of not taking them is far greater than the fear of trying. So the question was no longer whether she should speak, the question was whether she still could. Because what if the moment she finally found her courage was the moment he had already decided to walk away? Courage is not loud, it does not always feel like strength. Sometimes it feels like fear that refuses to let you stay silent any longer. And for Mary Bennet, that moment had finally come. Not because she was ready, not because she was certain of the outcome, but because the thought of saying nothing had become unbearable. She could no longer pretend, could no longer accept a future that did not belong to her, because now she understood something she had never allowed herself to believe before: that her heart mattered. That what she felt was not something to hide or dismiss or replace with something more convenient, and most importantly, that love, real love, required honesty, even if that honesty changed everything, even if it cost her everything. Meanwhile, Tom Hayward had already begun to let go, not all at once, not without resistance, but in the quiet way people do when they believe they have no other choice. He told himself it was for the best, that she deserved certainty, stability, things he was not sure he could ever fully provide. He convinced himself that what he felt was something he could live without. But the truth was far more complicated, because letting go of her did not feel like peace. It felt like losing something he had never truly had the chance to fight for. And that was the part that stayed with him, the part that would not settle, the part that kept asking, what if I had said something sooner? But time does not wait for clarity, and silence, once chosen, begins to shape reality. So he stepped back, he created distance, he prepared himself to accept what he believed was already decided, until suddenly, everything changed. Because Mary did something no one expected, something he never expected. She chose to speak, not carefully, not perfectly, but honestly. And honesty, once spoken, cannot be taken back. Every word carried everything she had tried to hide. Every doubt, every realization, every truth she had been too afraid to admit before. She did not speak as someone certain of being accepted. She spoke as someone who finally understood what she stood to lose. And that made all the difference, because love is not proven in perfect moments. It is revealed in the moments where there is everything to lose. And still, you choose to risk it. Tom heard her, not just the words, but the truth behind them, the sincerity, the vulnerability, the quiet strength it must have taken for her to stand there and finally say what she felt. And for a moment, everything stood still, because this was the moment neither of them had allowed themselves to fully imagine, the moment where everything unspoken was finally laid bare. But even then, there was still uncertainty, because love is not only about feeling, it is about timing, about choices, about whether two people can find their way to each other before doubt, fear, or circumstance pulls them apart for good. And standing there between what had been and what could be, they were both faced with the same question, not whether the feelings were real, not whether they mattered, but whether it was already too late to act on them. Because sometimes realizing the truth is not the hardest part. The hardest part is what comes after. Because what if love is finally spoken, but the damage of silence has already changed everything beyond repair? There is a moment just before everything changes, when the world seems to hold its breath, where nothing moves, nothing speaks, and yet everything is at stake. This was that moment. Mary had said what she never thought she would say. Tom had heard what he never thought he would hear, and still, neither of them moved, because love, no matter how strong, does not erase the past in an instant. There were still doubts, still fears, still the weight of everything left unsaid for far too long. Mary felt it all at once, the risk she had taken, the vulnerability she could not take back, and beneath it all, a quiet, terrifying question. What if it is not enough? Because she had waited. She had hesitated. She had chosen silence when she should have chosen truth, and now she was asking him to believe her, to trust that what she felt now had always been there, that it was real, that it was him. Tom felt it too, the pull toward her, the truth he had tried to bury, but also the doubt that had grown in the space her silence once filled. Because when you convince yourself to let go, you do not simply forget how. You build distance, you create reasons, you prepare your heart for a life without the one thing it truly wanted. And undoing that takes more than words. It takes trust. So he searched her eyes, not for perfection, not for certainty, but for truth. And what he found was not hesitation, not confusion, but something far stronger, clarity, the kind that only comes after struggle, after doubt, after nearly losing something you didn't realize you could not live without. And in that moment, everything became simple, not easy, but clear. Because love had never been the problem. Silence had been, fear had been, and now both had been broken. So he stepped forward, not as a man certain of the future, but as someone finally willing to fight for it. He did not promise perfection. He did not offer a life without hardship, but he offered something far more meaningful: honesty, devotion, a choice made fully and without hesitation. And this time, Mary did not look away. She did not question. She did not retreat into doubt. Because for the first time, she chose without fear. Yes, not as an answer given lightly, but as a truth she had fought to understand. Yes, to love that had been tested by silence and still endured. Yes, to a future that was uncertain, but real. And in that single word, everything they had nearly lost was found again. Not perfectly, not easily, but truly, because some love stories are not about falling in love. They are about realizing it just in time and holding on to it with everything you have. But even as they stood there, choosing each other at last,